Good day, and I would like to share with you a story for your listening pleasure, if you will. A Common Faith, Dewey. Yale University Press. The Terry Lectures. Chapter 1. Religion versus the Religious. Chapter 1. Never before in history has mankind been so much of two minds, so divided into two camps as it is today. Religions have traditionally been allied with ideas of the supernatural, and often have been based upon explicit beliefs about it. Today there are many who hold that nothing worthy of being called religious is possible apart from the supernatural. Those who hold this belief differ in many respects. They range from those who accept the dogmas and sacraments of the Greeks and Roman Catholic Church as the only sure means of access to the supernatural to the theist or mild deist. Between them are the many Protestant denominations who think the scriptures, aided by a pure conscience, are adequate avenues to supernatural truth and power. But they agree in one point: the necessity for a supernatural being and for an immortality that is beyond the power of nature. The opposed group consists of those who think the advance of culture and science has completely discredited the supernatural, and with it all religions that were allied with belief in it. But they go beyond this point. The extremists in this group believe that with elimination of the supernatural, not only must historic religions be dismissed, but with them everything of a religious nature. When historical knowledge has discredited the claims made for the supernatural character of the persons said to have founded historic religions, when the supernatural inspiration attributed to literatures held sacred has been riddled, and when anthropological and psychological knowledge has disclosed the all-too-human source from which religious beliefs and practices have sprung, everything religious must, they say, also go. There is one idea held in common by these two opposite groups: identification of the religious with the supernatural. The question I shall raise in these chapters concerns the ground for and the consequences of this identification, its reasons and its value. In the discussion, I shall develop another conception of the nature of the religious phase of experience, one that separates it from the supernatural and the things that have grown up about it. I shall try to show that these derivations and encumbrances, and that what is genuinely religious will undergo an emancipation when it is relieved from them. That then, for the first time, the religious aspect of experience will be free to develop freely on its own account. This view is exposed to attack from both the other camps. It goes contrary to traditional religions, including those that have the greatest hold upon the religiously minded today. The view announced will seem to them to cut the vital nerve of the religious element itself in taking away the basis upon which traditional religions and institutions have been founded. From the other side, the position I am taking seems like a timid halfway position, a concession and compromise unworthy of thought that is thoroughgoing. It is regarded as a view entertained from mere tender-mindedness, an emotional hangover from childhood indoctrination, or even as a manifestation of a desire to avoid disapproval and curry favor. The heart of my point, as so far as I shall develop it in this first section, is that there is a difference between religion, a religion, and the religious, between anything that may be denoted by a noun, substantive, and the quality of experience that is designated by an adjective. It is not easy to find a definition of religion in the substantive sense that wins general acceptance. However, in the Oxford Dictionary, I find the following: recognition on the part of man of some unseen higher power as having control of his destiny and as being entitled to obedience, reverence, and worship. This particular definition is less explicit in assertion of the supernatural character of the higher unseen power than are others that might be cited. It is, however, surcharged with implications having their source in ideas connected with the belief in the supernatural, characteristic of historic religions. Let us suppose that one familiar with the history of religions, including those called primitive, compares the definition with the variety of known facts, and by means of the comparison sets out to determine just what the definition means. I think he will be struck by three facts that reduce the terms of the definition to such a low common denominator that little meaning is left. He will note that the unseen powers referred to have been conceived in a multitude of incompatible ways. Eliminating the differences, nothing is left beyond the bare reference to something unseen and powerful. This has been conceived as the vague and undefined. Mana of the Melanesians, the kami of the primitive Shintoism, and the fetish of the Africans, spirits, having some human properties that pervade natural places and animate natural forces. The ultimate and impersonal principle of Buddhism, the unmoved mover of Greek thought, the gods and semi-divine heroes of the Greek and Roman pantheons, the personal and loving providence of Christianity, omnipotent and unlimited by a corresponding evil power, the arbitrary will of Muslimism, the supreme legislator and judge of deism. And these are but a few of the outstanding varieties of ways in which the invisible power has been conceived. There is no greater similarity in the ways in which obedience and reverence has been expressed. There has been worship of animals, of ghosts, of ancestors, phallic worship, as well as of being of dread power and of love and wisdom. Reverence has been expressed in the human sacrifices of the Peruvians and Aztecs, the sexual orgies of some Oriental religions, exorcisms and ablutions, the offering of the humble and contrite mind of the Hebrew prophet, the elaborate rituals of the Greek and Roman churches. Not even sacrifice has been uniform. It is highly sublimated in Protestant denominations and in Muslimism. Where it has existed, it has taken all kinds of forms and has been directed to a great variety of powers and spirits. It has been used for expiation, for procreation, and for buying special favors. There is no conceivable purpose for which rites have not been employed. Finally, there is no discernible unity in the moral motivations appealed to and utilized. They have been as far apart as fear of lasting torture, hope of enduring bliss in which sexual enjoyment has sometimes been a conspicuous element, mortification of the flesh and extreme asceticism, prostitution and chastity, wars to extirpate the unbeliever, persecution to convert or punish the unbeliever, and philanthropic zeal, servile acceptance of imposed dogma, along with brotherly love and aspiration for a reign of justice among men. I have, of course, mentioned only a sparse number of the facts which fill volumes in any well-stocked library. It may be asked by those who do not like to look upon the darker side of the history of religions why the darker facts should be brought up. We all know that civilized man has a background of bestiality and superstition, and that these elements are still with us. Indeed, have not some religions, including the most influential forms of Christianity, taught that the heart of man is totally corrupt? How could the course of religion in its entire sweep not be marked by practices that are shameful in their cruelty and lustfulness, and by beliefs that are degraded and intellectually incredible? What else than what we find could be expected in the case of people having little knowledge and no secure method of knowing, with primitive institutions, and with so little control of natural forces that they live in a constant state of fear? I gladly admit that historic religions have been relative to the conditions of social culture in which peoples lived. Indeed, what I am concerned with is to press home the logic of this method of disposal of outgrown traits of past religions. Beliefs and practices in a religion that now prevails are, by this logic, relative to the present state of culture. If so much flexibility has obtained in the past regarding an unseen power, the way it affects human destiny and the attitudes we are to take toward it, why should it be assumed that change in conception and action has now come to an end? The logic involved in getting rid of inconvenient aspects of past religions compels us to inquire how much in religions now accepted are survivals from outgrown cultures. It compels us to ask what conception of unseen powers and our relations to them would be consonant with the best achievements and aspirations of the present. It demands that in imagination we wipe the slate clean and start afresh by asking what would be the idea of the unseen, of the manner of its control over us, and the ways in which reverence and obedience would be manifested, if whatever is basically religious in experience had the opportunity to express itself free from all historic encumbrances. So we return to the elements of the definition that has been given. What boots it to accept in defense of the universality of religion, a definition, So we return to the elements of the definition that has been given. What boots it to accept in defense of the universality of religion, a definition that applies equally to the most savage and degraded beliefs and practices that have related to unseen powers and to noble ideals of a religion having the greatest share of moral content. What? There are 2 points involved. One of them is that there is nothing left worth preserving in the notions of unseen powers controlling human destiny to which obedience, reverence, and worship are due, if we glide silently over the nature that has been attributed to the powers, the radically diverse ways in which they have been supposed to control human destiny, and which submission and awe have been manifested. The other point is that when we begin to select, to choose, and say that some present ways of thinking about the unseen powers are better than others, that the reverence is shown by a free and self-respecting human spirit, self-respecting human being is better than the servile obedience rendered to an arbitrary power by frightened men. That we should believe that control of human destiny is exercised by a wise and loving spirit rather than by a madcap ghosts or sheer force. When I say we begin to choose, we have entered upon a road that has yet come to an end. We have reached a point that invites us to proceed farther. For we are forced to acknowledge that concretely there is no such thing as religion in the singular. There is only a multitude of religions. Religion is a strictly collective term, and the collection it stands for is not even of the kind illustrated in textbooks of logic. It has not the unity of a regiment or assembly, but that of any miscellaneous aggregate. Attempts to prove the universality prove too much or too little. It is probable that religions have been universal in the sense that all the peoples we know anything about have had a religion. But the differences among them are so great and so shocking that any common element that can be extracted is meaningless. The idea that religion is universal proves too little in that the older apologists for Christianity seem to have been better advised than some modern ones in condemning every religion but one as an impostor, as at bottom some kind of demon worship, or at any rate a superstitious figment. Choice among religions is imperative, and the necessity for choice leaves nothing of any force in the argument from universality. Moreover, when once we enter upon the road of choice, there is at once presented a possibility not yet generally realized. For the historic increase of the ethical and ideal content of religions suggests that the process of purification may be carried further. It indicates that further choice is imminent in which certain values and functions in experience may be selected. This possibility is what I had in mind in speaking of the difference between the religious and a religion. I am not proposing a religion, but rather the emancipation of elements and outlooks that may be called religious. For the moment, we have a religion, whether that of the Sioux Indian or of Judaism or of Christianity. That moment, the ideal factors in experience that may be called religious take on a load that is not inherent in them. A load of current beliefs and of institutional practices that are irrelevant to them. I can illustrate what I mean by a common phenomenon in contemporary life. It is widely supposed that a person who does not accept any religion is thereby shown to be a non-religious person. Yet it is conceivable that the present depression in religion is closely connected with the fact that religions now prevent, because of their weight of historic encumbrances, the religious quality of experience from coming to consciousness and finding the expression that is appropriate to present conditions, intellectual and moral. I believe that such is the case. I believe that many persons are so repelled from what exists as a religion by its intellectual and moral implications that they are not even aware of attitudes in themselves that if they came to fruition would be genuinely religious. I hope that this remark may help make clear what I mean by the distinction between religion as a noun substantive and religious as adjectival. To be somewhat more explicit, a religion, and as I have just said, there is no such thing as religion in general, always signifies a special body of beliefs and practices having some kind of institutional organization, loose or tight. In contrast, the adjective religious denotes nothing in the way of a specifiable entity, either institutional or as a system of beliefs. It does not denote anything to which one can specifically point as one can point to this and that historic religion or existing church. For it does not denote anything that can exist by itself or that can be organized into a particular and distinctive form of existence. It denotes attitudes that may be taken toward every object and every proposed end or ideal. Before, however, I develop my suggestion that realization of the distinction just made would operate to emancipate the religious quality from encumbrances that now smother or limit it, I must refer to a position that in some respects is similar in words to the position I have taken, but that in fact is a whole world removed from it. I have several times used the phrase religious elements of experience. Now, at present, there is much talk, especially in liberal circles, of religious experiences vouching for the authenticity of certain beliefs and the desirability of certain practices, such as particular forms of prayer and worship. It is even asserted that religious experience is the ultimate basis of religion itself. The gulf between this position and that which I have taken is what I am now concerned to point out. Those who hold to the notion that there is a definite kind of experience which is itself religious, by that very fact make out of it something specific, as a kind of experience that is marked off from experience as aesthetic, scientific, moral, political, from experience as companionship and friendship. But religious, as a quality of experience, signifies something that may belong to all these experiences. It is the polar opposite of some type of experience that can exist by itself. The distinction comes out clearly when it is noted that the concept of this distinct kind of experience is used to validate a belief in some special kind of object and also to justify some special kind of practice. For there are many religionists who are now dissatisfied with the older proofs of the existence of God, those that go by the name of ontological, cosmological, and teleological. The causes of this dissatisfaction is perhaps not so much the arguments that Kant used to show the insufficiency of these alleged proofs, as it is the growing feeling that they are too formal to offer any support to religion in action. Anyway, the dissatisfaction exists. Moreover, these religionists are moved by the rise of the experimental method in other fields. What is more natural and proper, accordingly, than that they should affirm they are just as good empiricists as anybody else, indeed, as good as the scientists themselves? As the latter rely upon certain kinds of experience to prove the existence of certain kinds of objects, so the religionists rely upon a certain kind of experience to prove the existence of the object of religion, especially the supreme object, God. The discussion may be made more definite by introducing, at this point, a particular illustration of this type of reasoning. A writer says, "I broke down from overwork and soon came to the verge of nervous prostration. One morning after a long and sleepless night, I resolved to stop drawing upon myself so continuously and begin drawing upon God. I determined to set apart a quiet time every day in which I could relate my life to its ultimate source, regain the consciousness of that God. of that in God I live, move, and have my being. That was 30 years ago. Since then, I have had literally not 1 hour of darkness or despair. This is an impressive record. I do not doubt its authenticity, nor that of the experience related. It illustrates a religious aspect of experience, but it illustrates also the use of that quality to carry a superimposed load of a particular religion. For having been brought up in the Christian religion, its subject interprets it in the terms of the personal God characteristic of that religion. Taoists, Buddhists, Muslims, persons of no religion, including those who reject all supernatural influence and power, have had experiences similar in their effect. Yet another author commenting upon the passage says, "The religious expert can be more sure that this God exists than he can of either the cosmological God of speculative surmise or the Christ-like God involved in the validity of moral optimism," and goes on to add that such experiences mean that God, the Savior, the power that gives victory over sin on certain conditions that man can fulfill, is an existent, accessible, and scientifically knowable reality. It should be clear that this inference is sound only if the conditions, of whatever sort, that produce the effect are called God. But most readers will take the inference to mean that the existence of a particular being, of the type called God, in the Christian religion, is proved by a method akin to that of experimental science. In reality, the only thing that can be said to be proved is the existence of some complex of conditions that have operated to effect an adjustment in life, an orientation that brings with it a sense of security and peace. The particular interpretation given to this complex of conditions is not inherent in the experience itself. It is derived from the culture with which a particular person has been imbued. A fatalist will give one name to it, a Christian Scientist another, and the one who rejects all supernatural beings still another. The determining factor in the interpretation of the experience is the particular doctrinal apparatus into which a person has been inducted. The emotional deposit connected with prior teaching floods the whole situation. It may readily confer upon the experience such a peculiarly sacred preciousness that all inquiry into its causation is barred. The stable outcome is so invaluable that the cause to which it is referred is usually nothing but a reduplication of the thing that has occurred, plus some name that has acquired a deeply emotional quality. The intent of this discussion is not to deny the genuineness of the result, nor its importance in life. It is not, save incidentally, to point out the possibility of a purely naturalistic explanation of the event. My purpose is to indicate what happens when religious experience is already set aside as something sui generis. The actual religious quality in the experience described is the effect produced. The better adjustment in life and its conditions, not the manner and cause of its production. The way in which the experience operated, its function, determines its religious value. If the reorientation actually occurs, it and the sense of security and stability accompanying it are forces on their own account. It takes place in different persons in a multitude of ways. It is sometimes brought about by devotion to a cause, sometimes by a passage of poetry that opens a new perspective, sometimes, as was the case with Spinoza, deemed an atheist in his day, through philosophical reflection. The difference between an experience having a religious force because of what it does in and to the processes of living and religious experience as a separate kind of thing gives me occasion to refer to a previous remark. If this function were rescued through emancipation from dependence upon specific types of beliefs and practices, from those elements that constitute a religion, many individuals would find that experiences having the force of bringing about a better, deeper, and enduring adjustment in life are not so rare and infrequent as they are commonly supposed to be. They occur frequently in connection with many significant moments of living. The idea of having invisible powers would take on the meaning of all the conditions of nature and human association that support and deepen the sense of values which carry one through periods of darkness and despair to such an extent that they lose their usual depressive character. I do not suppose for many minds the dislocation of the religious from a religion is easy to effect. Tradition and custom, especially when emotionally charged, are part of the habits that have become one with our very being. But the possibility of the transfer is demonstrated by its actuality. Let us then for the moment drop the term religious and ask, what are the attitudes that lend deep and enduring support to the processes of a living? I have, for example, used the words adjustment and orientation. What do they signify? While the words accommodation, adaptation, and adjustment are frequently employed as synonyms, attitudes exist that are so different that, for the sake of clear thought, they should be discriminated. There are conditions we meet that cannot be changed. If they are particular and limited, we modify our own particular attitudes in accordance with them. Thus, we accommodate ourselves to changes in weather, to alterations in income when we have no other recourse. When the external conditions are lasting, we become inured, habituated, or, as the process is now often called, conditioned. The two main traits of this attitude, which I should like to call accommodation, are that it affects particular modes of conduct, not the entire self, and that the process is mainly passive. It may, however, become general, and then it becomes fatalistic resignation or submission. There are other attitudes toward the environment that are also particular, but that are more active. We react against conditions and endeavor to change them to meet our wants and demands. Plays in a foreign language are adapted to meet the needs of an American audience. A house is rebuilt to suit changed conditions of the household. The telephone is invented to serve the demand for speedy communication at a distance. Dry soils are irrigated so that they may bear abundant crops. Instead of accommodating ourselves to conditions, we modify conditions so that they will be accommodated to our wants and purposes. This process may be called adaptation. Now, both of these processes are often called by the more general name of adjustment, but there are also changes in ourselves in relation to the world in which we live that are much more inclusive and deep-seated. They relate not to this and that want in relation to this and that condition of our surroundings, but pertain to our being in its entirety. Because of their scope, this modification of ourselves is enduring. It lasts through any amount of vicissitude, of circumstances, internal and external. There is a composing and harmonizing of the various elements of our being such that, in spite of changes in the special conditions that surround us, these conditions are also arranged, settled in relation to us. This attitude includes a note of submission, but it is voluntary, not externally imposed. And as voluntary, it is something more than a mere stoical resolution to endure unperturbed throughout the buffetings of fortune. It is more outgoing, more ready and glad than the latter attitude, and it is more active than the former. And in calling it voluntary, it is not meant that it depends upon a particular resolve or volition. It is a change of will conceived as the organic plenitude of our being, rather than any special change in will. It is the claim of religions that they effect this generic and enduring change in attitude. I should like to turn the statement around and say that whenever this change takes place, there is definitely religious attitude. It is not a religion that brings it about, but when it occurs, from whatever cause and by whatever means, there is a religious outlook and function. As I have said before, the doctrinal or intellectual apparatus and the institutional accretions that grow up are, in a strict sense, advantageous to the intrinsic quality of such experiences, for they are affairs of the traditions of the culture with which individuals are inoculated. Mr. Santayana has connected the religious quality of experience with the imaginative, as that is expressed in poetry. Religion and poetry, he says, are identical in essence and differ merely in the way in which they are attached to practical affairs. Poetry is called religion when it interferes in life, and religion, when it merely supervenes upon life, is seen to be nothing but poetry. The difference between intervening in and supervening upon is as important as is the identity set forth. Imagination may play upon life, or it may enter profoundly into it. As Mr. Santayana puts it, poetry has a universal and moral function, for its highest power lies in its relevance to the ideals and purposes of life. Except as it intervenes. All observation is observation of brutal fact. All discipline is mere repression. Until these facts digested and this discipline embodied, inhumane impulses become the starting point for a creative movement of the imagination, the firm basis for ideal constructions in science, in society, religion, and art. I'm going to leave it right there. That's page 18. If you want me to continue reading this, let me know.